quite some time ago, my wife and I went to a movie. And this movie drove me absolutely up the wall. It was like a cat scratching on glass. It was just, there was something about this movie that just really, I couldn't handle it. I didn't know why I couldn't handle it. But let me tell you some of the movie, sort of the lead into this course on codependency. It was a story of this younger lady, and she had gone off into the business world, and she found out that her mom had cancer. So she came back to visit her mom, and of course then stayed with her mom to try and help her through this and so on. And as she did, she noticed sort of funny stuff that was going on, and she couldn't figure out exactly what it was. And but her mom was this epitome, I mean, of everything that you would want a mom to be. I mean, she was with the ladies that would, do the 4th of July celebration. Her husband was a professor at this university, and he always wanted to publish this book, and she saw this opportunity to get him together with this guy who maybe had read his book. And so she got that all together. The guy hadn't even read his book, and he was devastated, and of course she helped him out, and she soothed everything over and made everything fine. And so he didn't know what was going on, but it looked like maybe the husband was having an affair or something, because he would sort of disappear after he was, and he wouldn't even, and this car would drop him off at night, like about 10 or 12 o'clock at night. And of course she put up with this, and she didn't bother her or anything, and she was doing all the work, although she had cancer. And finally she got so much that she was bedridden, and of course they really cared about her, and then she died. But the police were investigating because she died of an overdose of morphine. And of course the father thought what? The daughter had done it. And the daughter thought what? The father had done it. And here was Dad being dropped off again, and she followed, and guess what she found out? He was an absolute drunk, and after college he would go to this bar and just sit there until he was drunk out of his mind, and they had a deal with the bartender that he would stick him in the car and drive him home and drop him off. And what they figured out is that the mom with her cancer had forced herself, gotten up, went over, and gotten the morphine, and overdosed because she didn't want to be a bother to them. Now, what's that a description of? That's codependency. And that's what we're going to talk about, and it's a very complicated subject in that we have so many different people, and this has so many different faces that you see that it gets very confusing. In fact, it's confusing enough that psychology itself won't even address it. They just say, we can't define that, we can't get a handle on that, and so we're not going to address it. We'll address mental illnesses. This isn't really a total mental illness. Let's talk about how this sort of fits in the overall picture. Here is healthy or normal. Healthy and normal people have some codependent tendencies. Then we have codependency. This is dysfunctional. Not totally dysfunctional. You can function some. And it goes all the way from being pretty functional to being almost totally non-functional. And then below that we have mental illness, which is non-functional. See what I'm saying? So this is not a mental illness, okay? But it is a real problem, and we'll see when we look at the statistics and so on in America of how much of a problem this really is. But first, let's see if we can figure out what this is. The original term came from drug-alcohol counseling 20 or 30 years ago, where people would go to a 30-day program. And they would come home, and they were doing fine on the 30-day program and immediately drink. So they started studying the families. They started realizing that the alcoholics and the people in the families had the same characteristics and the same kind of problems. If there was something going on in the family that looked an awful lot like what was going on with the addict, so they called it codependency. The people in the family seem somehow to be dependent on the other person drinking as much as the drinking person was dependent on the drinking. And so that was the original idea. But then as things went on, people noticed there were a whole lot of people over here that didn't drink, they didn't have someone drinking, and they had the same problems. And began to realize that this was almost an epidemic in America and other places of people that had this thing similar to this thing they called codependency. So let's look at some definitions to start with, and then we're going to look at some of the characteristics. And we're going to try and put them together and get an idea here. Now in this particular class, I'm not going to be able to sort this out because we're just going to look what the literature says. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm going to show you what's out there, and in this class we're going to try and go a lot deeper in that and try and sort this out a whole lot more. But we won't have time to get to that in the class. It's going to have enough to look at just right here. So let's just look at a bunch of definitions here, and I want you to think about these definitions. The way I see it is all of these people wrote these books based on their own life experience and their own characteristics. And they said, yeah, that's codependency. And it's no, that's codependency. No, that's codependency. No, that's codependency. And that's why it's so confusing. I believe there are a lot of different types of codependency under this same thing, but I believe they have all the same common root. It's just people cope differently in life to try and meet these different needs. So here's the first one, and one of the first books that came out on this was by Melody Beatty. And this is called Codependency No More. And this is her definition. One who has let another's behavior affect him or her and who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. So you hear that. So what's the main thing here? It has to do with being overly connected and controlling, right? Let's go to another one. Probably the next most famous book in this area is called Love is a Choice. Okay? And this is their definition. An addiction to people, behaviors, or things. The fallacy of trying to control interior feelings by controlling people, things, and events on the outside. Control or lack of it is central to every aspect of life. Okay, do you see that one? So what's this one really emphasizing? See, the first one's more emphasizing fixing people. This one's emphasizing controlling things. Okay? Next one. A preoccupation and extreme dependence, emotionally, socially, and sometimes physically, on a person or object. That comes from a book called Why It Happens. Another one. A compulsion to control and rescue people by fixing their problems. It occurs when a person's needs for love and security have been blocked in a relationship with a dysfunctional person. Okay? Next, an inordinate and unhealthy compulsion to rescue and take care of people. That's the one from Pat Springle, and that's the one that's probably the closest to the person married to the alcoholic. Another one that's called love hunger. In other words, it's basically a desperate need for love. You're trying to get somebody to love you. It's your response to being hungry for love, empty for love, and looking for love. The definition that I use is excessive independence or dependence on people or things. What am I saying? That you are trying to be your own God. The Bible term for codependency is idolatry. See, what do we tell men in our society? We men are to be the all self-sufficient ones, right? And we never make a mistake, and we never have any problems, and we just go around rescuing damsels that are in trouble, right? Isn't that the way it is? Well, that's a good definition of a codependent independent. But then what do we tell the ladies in our society? Just find a God here on earth, and he will meet all your needs according to his riches and glory. Right? So do you see, we have excessive independence. I'm going to go do my own thing, take care of me. We have excessive dependence on other people or things in this world. Do you see how I'm defining it? It's the two extremes. And that's what we're really looking at in the things that are going on inside people. Some of us want to try and be our own God. Some want to find a God here on earth. What are we all missing out on? Our relationship with God. And we're going to find out that that's really what it's going to take to really turn most of this codependency and stuff like that around. So what are some of the characteristics now? And I realize this is going to be very confusing. But I'm going to take some of those definitions. I'll give you the definition and the characteristics that they give. And then we'll set another set of characteristics. And I want you to sort of get a flavor for the differences here that we're really talking about. Okay? And there are a lot of these different characteristics, so I'm going to read them pretty fast. You don't have to get them down. So we'll be looking at each one of these. Realize that these won't necessarily even be the different types that we end up with. This is what the literature is saying. These are different books. I'm just taking directly from the book their list. Okay? So let's take the first one here, and this is from Codependent No More. Remember that definition? It was one who lets another person's behavior affect him or her and who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. Melody Beatty. These are her characteristics. Okay? Caretaking. Low self-worth. Repression of feelings. Obsession. It's a big issue in their mind, going around and around. Controlling. Denial. Dependency. Poor communication. Weak boundaries. Lack of trust. Anger. Sexual problems. Over or under responsible. And addictions. What picture does that give you? What does the codependent look like? Something that basically has buried everything inside, but it's more of a general picture. I sort of put a term on it, I'll call this as sort of the fixer. The person is just going out there, they're fixing everything, they're going around controlling people. They have addictions, they're dependent, they're obsessed, low self-worth, all of those kind of things. Say, now think of that one. So get that in mind. Now let's look at another one. This is from Love is a Choice. These are their characteristics. And think about which ones of these are all the same. Which ones are the same and which ones are different. Driven by one or more compulsions. Tormented by the dysfunctional family of origin. Self-esteem and usually maturity low. Certain happiness depends on others. Feels inordinately responsible for others. Relationship marred by unstable extremes of independence and dependence. Master of denial and repression. Worries about and tries to change what cannot be changed. Life punctuated by extremes. Looking for something missing in their life or lacking in their life. There's some emptiness they're trying to fill. How is this one sort of maybe different from the other one that we had so far? Do you see, this person's more passive, where the other person was more active of what they were doing. Do you see that? Go to the next one. The next one comes from Conquering Codependency or Untangling Relationships by Pat Springle. These are his characteristics. Lack of objectivity. Warped sense of responsibility. Being controlled or controlling others. Hurt and angry. Feeling guilty. Loneliness. What have we got here? What's this one? I think this is the rescuer. You see, this is the person that the main thing they feel over-responsible for other people, so they're rescuing them. Now, what I'm not talking about here is why they do this or anything like that. We're going to try and understand that next time. Okay, I just want you to think about it. But now let's look at some more extremes of codependency. I'm going to call this one the perpetrator. because these are the characteristics of a domestic violence perpetrator. And realize codependency underlies that also. It's just taken to a greater extreme. And listen to these characteristics. Feels victimized. Whole world's against him. Focuses on others. It's very competitive to win. Low self-worth. Minimizes. Denies. Repressed feelings. Dependent. Vents rage. Feels powerful through the abuse. He's a controller. Fearful about relationships. See, what's driving him? A fear of abandonment, a fear that the person's going to leave him, so he's going to turn his wife into a sniveling idiot. And basically make her totally dependent, where he is totally in control. Obsessed about the victim. Self-justifying. Isolated, because he sees everyone against him. Believes he has the only true reality. Feels entitled, dominating, enforces demands, and physically violent. Does this one feel much different than the other ones? But it still has the same codependency stuff underneath it. It's just what? He doesn't want to be abandoned. He doesn't want to have her leave. He needs her, so he desperately needs her, and he is going to do everything he needs to make sure she doesn't ever leave, to make sure she feels that she can't handle anything, to make sure that his needs get met, right? Same thing. All of these things had what in common? They're all trying to get their deep needs met in some way by manipulating, controlling, rescuing, being a good girl, all of these kind of things to try to get their needs met. We're going to find out that that has a lot to do with the core issues here that we're dealing with. Well, let's look at one more. What's the victim like of domestic violence? What does that look like? Well, she feels victimized too. What's interesting here is the victim and the perpetrator all have the same characteristics except for the very last ones of how they're actually doing all this. See, ask yourself the question, why is it that ladies that have been victimized in the area of domestic violence will go back to the guy over and over again? Look at some of the characteristics. Focused on others. Why? To survive. If she doesn't do what's right, if she doesn't go along, what's going to happen? Low self-worth. Probably because he has destroyed any worth that she has. Minimizes. Yeah, they'll go so far as that they will basically blame it all on themselves. In fact, the usual victim will go around and they will, well, if I just didn't do this, if I just hadn't said that, then he wouldn't do this. And they'll turn it all on themselves. Denies. Why? To protect themselves, basically, so they don't have those emotional feelings. Repressed feelings. See, those are the same. Dependent. Suppresses anger. Because if she ever gets angry at him, what's going to happen? Feels powerless. She is. Controlled. Fearful about the safety and the relationship. She doesn't want to lose him, but she also doesn't want to die in the process. Obsessed about survival. See, do you see what we're saying, that dysfunction, say, an alcoholic is some, but look how much dysfunction we have here. How would you react in a situation like that? Do you think you might develop some dysfunctional coping mechanisms? And some dysfunctional ways of handling life? Self-blaming usually justifies the batterer. It's all my fault because I'm worthless and I'm no good and he's just trying to help me and I'm wrong in all the things that I think and everything that I do. He's right. So it's all my fault, isn't it? Compliant. Probably for self-protection. Doubts their own reality. Believes escape is impossible. Humiliated, injured, and afraid. Well, from the literature, do we have sort of a big spectrum of what this thing is that's called codependency? There's a sort of a core issue out there. What were some of the core things? If you think about it, what were some of the core things that were the same in all these?
Low self-worth.
Yeah, low self-worth is definitely one of them. How about controlling? How about denial of emotions? So there's quite a few things that are the same, but you see there's some significant differences that we have in the different ones, and that's the literature. We're going to get a lot deeper into that later on. But let's just look at this whole problem now. That's sort of a flavor of what codependency is, and I realize it's very mucky, and it's very, what was that? That kind of feeling. Well, we want to understand this a whole lot more in this course so we can deal with it. I had a pastor friend that was actually had a church in Denver in the middle of the ghetto. And I was talking to him and I was explaining codependency to him and trying to help him have an understanding of it. And what do you think he said to me? That's everybody in my church. There's nobody in my church that doesn't have that. So in a way it gets discounted because it's normal, right? If you are brought up in a family like that, or brought up and everyone is acting like that, everyone's like the soap operas. See, what are the soap operas? Classes on codependency. Right? But not only that, what are our nursery rhymes? Think of Cinderella. Let me ask a couple of questions about Cinderella. How dependent is Cinderella on the prince? 100%. She has no standing in the nation at all without him. If he snaps his fingers, her head is chopped off, or she's cleaning cinders out of the chimney again. And what's wrong with the prince? How come he couldn't relate to the noble ladies of the land as some of equal stature? How come he had to find someone with low self-worth? And think of all the stories that we have like that. And then think of all the country western music. If you're going to jump off Lover's Leap with somebody because you can't live without them, how overly dependent are you on them? And love music. See, think of all that stuff. See, we program people. Think of this. What's the picture that all the ladies have? What are they looking for? Mr. Right. The knight in shining armor that's going to rescue me and take me to the castle to live happily ever after. The prince that is going to meet all of my needs. See, this is throughout our entire society, right? And how do we look at it? See, like that movie that drove me crazy, that this is the way things are. See, what was the one good thing in his life? The codependent wife. That's the way the whole movie was trying to say. This is what you women should all be like. You know, the best thing you could do is kill yourself so you wouldn't be a burden to us, right? but that's what the movie said. And they saw it as a positive thing. So do you see, this is just totally built within our entire society, and we don't even recognize it. I hate to say it, but most churches see the codependent as the ideal Christian because they will sacrifice and they will never say no to the pastor. And they will take on more and more jobs in the church until they don't even make services anymore. Let me tell you what goes on in churches. Some new person comes into the church and they get saved and they want to help. And so they take on the nursery, and they got that for the rest of their life, and they take on the Sunday school, and they got that, and they take on the next thing, and pretty soon they get burned out. But then there's the alternative. That's one type of codependency, another alternative in the church. And that is the person comes in, and they're desperately needy. And they find somebody in the church who will listen to them. Of course, you realize they're calling and talking for 3 hours every day, and they're trying to talk to the pastor for an hour or two every day. And finally, that person says, I'm sorry, I just don't have the time. They start setting boundaries, and what does the codependent do? They don't love me. They go find somebody else, and they tell them how bad the first person was. And they go throughout the church person to person to person until they drain the entire church of all the love it used to have. And then they say, this church doesn't have any love. And they go on to the next church and they do exactly the same thing, desperately trying to get their needs met. Have you ever seen any of this? Yeah. But that's what this codependency looks like when it is lived out. I'll give you sort of a little sorry story here. But this particular, because I had her as a client, but I couldn't find anything she wasn't addicted to. And she was in a codependency support group, and we try not to let this happen, but she had lost her apartment, and there was a codependent couple in there, and so they invited her to come and live with them. Well, I got this call about 1 o'clock in the morning, and all I could hear was screaming on the other end of the phone. Okay, see, what had happened is that the couple had gotten in a fight, and she had taken the husband's side. And the fight was so bad that the landlord was there trying to evict them, and they're about ready to call the police of the whole mess that this thing had turned into, of all these codependents who had no boundaries and everything sort of melted down. So there are all sorts of different levels of this, do you understand? But it's out there, it's real world, it's what's really happening, and we have to realize this is a big problem. The problem is we have a real hard time defining what we're really talking about and understanding what we're really talking about so we can get a hold of it and get the help that we need. Just as you've seen, there are a lot of books on codependency, and they have different ways of slants, different ways of dealing with it, and so on, and we don't have an integrated whole. That's what's really happening. If you want to get an idea here, if we just talk about the codependents that are based on because they were married to an addict, there are 15 million addicts in America, and that means there are 60 million direct codependents just based on other people having addictions, even if we're not talking about all the rest of this stuff that's going on. My estimate is at least 1/4 to 1/2 of all people in America are so codependent that they can't have healthy relationships. Their relationships all look a lot more like the soap operas. And all the drama. Ever heard the term drama that the kids use? What does that mean? It probably means you're dealing with some codependence. It's a growing epidemic. It's throughout the church. We have all this stuff going on. See, and how have we handled it? Well, we've immortalized it in all the nursery rhymes and all the songs and all of those kind of things, like this is something good. How does the Bible handle it? I already mentioned it tells the stories of real people, of what really happened to them, and we're going to find later that we have all the different types of codependency we've been able to identify to this date of good concrete stories in the Bible that tells you the story and then gives you some answers of how to deal with this. Of course, the Bible considers it to be idolatry. That this is like having an idol made out of wood. Your idol is just made out of flesh, right? It's either yourself or it's somebody else. How does it look like in psychology? Ever hear of Alfred Adler? He came up with the inferiority complex. See, what we have is we have an elephant. We have a lot of blind people looking at it, and they look at the same elephant from a lot of different directions, and they come up with different terms and different ways of looking at it, right? Another one, a doctor named Charles Solomon, who's a Christian, wrote a book called The Spirit of Rejection. That's also been called an addictive personality. Love as a choice suggests the average codependent has at least 2 addictions. Now, we're not talking about drug alcohol addictions all the time. We're talking relationship addiction. We're talking romance addiction, spending addiction, eating addiction, workaholism, and all the other type of things that people do to cope. And that's the way they kill the pain of the emptiness inside of them. I said psychology really has a problem because they haven't been able to tie it down. What they've done is sort of said, we don't deal with that. But they still do, because when it gets too bad, it crosses that line from dysfunctional to non-functional. So in DSM-4, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, we have certain things that correspond to this only when it gets much worse. One is called dependence personality disorder. Another one is avoidant personality disorder. borderline personality disorder. And normally, if we have to code codependency, we'll just code it as an adjustment disorder. Meaning if the person is having an adjustment problem in their life because that's not really seen totally as a mental illness. And of course, anxiety disorder is that kind of stuff. How does social psychology look at codependence? They see it as a coping mechanism for low self-worth due to dysfunctional families. How about block development? In other words, these people have block development, so they're not whole people. They got problems with their identity and all of these kind of things in their life, so they haven't really developed adequately. That's another way of looking at this particular thing. How about marriage and family therapy? How do they look at this? Well, Murray Bowen calls it a lack of differentiation. In other words, the person is too enmeshed with other people, and so they're not being their own person. Another term is called enmeshment. Another is disengagement. Some of you have heard some of these things. If you don't worry about it. But Prepare and Rich, how do they look at this? Well, they have a chart in Prepare and Rich that has to do with marriages, and they plot connectiveness versus flexibility. And if you're too connected or too disconnected, too flexible or too inflexible, what is that showing you? Excessive dependence or independence on people or things. It's really another way of looking at the whole thing of codependency and what's going on there. It's out of balance, connection, and control is what we're really saying there. So to see the overall thing, and I hope maybe you are a little bit confused. What I mean by that is that there are so many things. That first class when I ever did this, what in the world? Because I was trying to take all these different characteristics and which are the common ones and so on. But I really believe the difference is everyone has written it from different types of codependency, and we need to sort those things out and make all those things concrete. So here are our challenges, and I ask for your prayer. Okay, in this class, but I believe we will succeed. We've got to sort this whole thing out, and here's the biggie: understand the cause and effect. What causes people to have those certain characteristics based on the way they're seeing life, based on what has happened to them, and so on and so forth. Determine those specific types. Put flesh on them by finding the Bible models that adjust to them, and we've already done that. We're going to be giving that to you. And then come up with specific treatments for each one of these that would be the most effective to help all these different codependent situations that we're talking about. That's asking quite a bit, but I believe the Holy Spirit will help us, and we'll be able to do that. He's already given me some ideas of understanding of how these things all fit together. But let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you, through the Holy Spirit, and through your process of salvation, want to make us all completely whole. And Lord, you've called us to help ourselves and help people become all that you want us to be. And we ask for your wisdom. We ask for your direction, that we can be those effective people helpers that you've called us to be in Jesus' name. Amen.